Let's get to this. Gary Danielson set to retire after 2025. He did call some of the Vols' most memorable games. Let's start with the 2015 Georgia comeback. What will you remember about Gary Danielson's broadcast with Georgia?
Well, that one was it was Tennessee's what seemed like a turning a corner moment for Butch Jones. I know it sounds funny to say now. For those who don't remember, Tennessee opened 2015, expected to win the SEC East. They lost to Oklahoma, blew a 17-0 lead. Then they lost to Florida because Butch Jones couldn't count to 14 and couldn't use his timeouts properly in the fourth quarter. And then they lost to Arkansas the week after, so they're 2-3. Then they fall behind to Georgia 21-0, or was it 24-3? I can't remember. And there's like a 4th and 9. Josh Dobbs throws a touchdown pass to Josh Smith, and Tennessee forces a fumble on a kickoff. They score another touchdown. They come back, end up winning 30-31, and that sparks going from 2-3 to finishing 9-4 and having won 6 straight. Their only loss being in the last second to Alabama. Okay. That Georgia game was that was one of your Josh Dobbs masterpieces where he had 400 total yards of offense, 300 passing, 100 rushing, and 5 total touchdowns.
Poll that. We got a new poll question. Sam says Gary Danielson is the worst announcer in history and the biggest Alabama homer on earth, and nothing will convince me otherwise. Caleb, what's our poll question?
All right, new poll question is, should Gary Danielson be a topic? No, Caleb has been drinking.
Yeah, okay. Should Gary Danielson be a topic? That's our poll question. No, Caleb's been drinking, or yes, Caleb's on point. I love Gary Danielson.
Here's the thing, guys. Gary Danielson wasn't an Alabama homer. He just happened to call the SEC on CBS during the entire Alabama dynasty, the greatest dynasty. What's he supposed to do? Say Alabama is not a national champion this year? Okay.
More love for Gary Danielson. Gary Danielson didn't even want to be a topic. He just got on board and voted. No, Caleb's been drinking. Daniel says, screw Gary Donaldson. He showed us very little respect, in my opinion, which only matters here.
I disagree. Guys, he didn't show Tennessee very little respect. Tennessee just sucked most of the time he was calling games. If you really watch Gary Danielson, he wanted Tennessee to be good. It's not his fault Tennessee went. Dave, did Gary Danielson hire Derek Dooley and Butch Jones? Did he make those moves?
Dylan says Gary was such an Alabama homer that he made the third Saturday in October such a drag to get through.
That made the third Saturday in October such a drag to get through. Not Alabama winning every game 45-0 against Tennessee.
Steve says, as we pile on, Steve says Danielson was as good at announcing as he was a quarterback.
You guys.
Adam says Gary Danielson is a product of poor player safety. He obviously has brain damage, and you guys should be kind to him despite his terrible observations.
I don't think they're that bad.
What's the poll question again? He's the only person I've ever heard use the word bastardized.
Should Gary Danielson be a topic? No, Caleb's been drinking. Yes, Caleb's on point. I love Gary. I want to know who said I love Gary.
What's the results? We didn't get the results.
The results were 83% Caleb's been drinking. And
83%
Caleb is on point.
All right. Dylan says Jalen Milroe could have thrown a pass directly to Keenan Peely, and Gary would have said it was pass interference. Man, nobody likes Gary Danielson. What other memorable games did he muck up for the Vols?
I thought he called great ones. One of the best ones was when Tennessee ended their 11-game losing streak to Florida. They played Florida in 2016, came back from 21-0 to win. Gary Danielson was the only one who said, by the way, and people aren't respecting this, Tennessee goes down 21-3 at halftime. Everybody's like, this season's over. They're losing to Florida. Gary Danielson said on the broadcast, guys, Tennessee's moving the ball. They're just not finishing the drives. But if they keep doing this up, if the defense steps up, they're going to come back and win this game. And boy, he nailed that.
Hit the thumbs up button if you hate Gary Danielson. That's shooting fish in a barrel. General Ursa says watching a broadcast with Gary was like getting teeth pulled for 3 hours. Go ahead. What's your other most memorable game before I get to Daniel's comment? Well, let's go ahead and do Daniel's comment. He talked smack about how Neyland, how average it was right before the A&M game when we hit 122 decibels.
Okay, wait a minute, though. That was, if I'm not mistaking, the 2020 season, and 2 weeks before Tennessee had played Florida at home, and Tennessee wasn't bothering to show up that day. So, that was his last game of the year, and Tennessee went Pruitt fired. You would think Gary Danielson was the reason Tennessee had a decade of dysfunction, honestly. You would think he caused it.
Maybe it's Caleb and Gary.
I want to put that as a poll question.
I like this poll question.
Oh, I already took it down. I'm sorry.
Sam
But
says the point is that an Alabama linebacker could have shot a Tennessee quarterback in the backfield, and Gary Danielson would have said, "Good tackle," and not roughing the passer.
um, okay, here we go. Is Gary Danielson at fault for the Vols' decade of destruction? Yes, Tennessee deserves no blame, no personal responsibility.
Okay, Dylan says, I remember when Hendon Hooker got his teeth knocked out from targeting and Gary defended the Alabama player. Derek says, and if you want to look this up, you can. I'm not going to do the research. Derek says that Tennessee was 4-14 against Florida when Gary had the call. That sounds about right.
They weren't even 4-14. They haven't even beaten Florida 4 times since Gary Danielson became the call. Tennessee has beaten Florida 3 times since Gary Danielson was at CBS, and one was last year when they were on ESPN. They only beat Florida twice with Gary Danielson calling the games.
What other memorable games did Gary call?
Okay, so other memorable games was the 2016 Georgia game, the Dobbs nail boot game. He's the one who said it's another hobnail boot when Tennessee hit the Hail Mary to beat Georgia. That was a memorable one. And then the most notable ones I just got to point out were the ones that he actually.
Caleb. It's a loss.
No, it wasn't. Tennessee beat Georgia.
Oh, you said the hobnail boot game?
Yes, but Gary Danielson referred to it as another hobnail boot. So he called it the Dobbs nail boot.
Okay, sorry.
So, and then
this from Dylan, the root of all evil is money and Gary Danielson.
He also called. He also called. All right, here's there's a couple that he called before he went to SEC
Possibly
on CBS.
The most fun I've ever had on the show. Go ahead.
So before he went to SEC on CBS, Tennessee visited Miami in 2003 and won 10-6. Gary Danielson called that game, and again was the only one giving Tennessee credit because the rest of the studio was like, "Look at all these mistakes Miami's making," and Gary Danielson was like, "They were playing disciplined football, and Casey Clausen never made the critical mistake." And he called the 1990 Tennessee-Florida game that Tennessee won 45-3. Interestingly enough.
Okay, another post on the message board. Do you want to update us on the poll question? You
yes,
messed it up though, didn't you?
Is Gary Danielson at fault for the Vols' decade of dysfunction? Yes, Tennessee deserves no blame. No, that was all the Vols' fault.
Okay, how about this? Gary Danielson doesn't use a microphone; he uses a pitchfork.
Sounds like you wrote that.
I did write that.
Oh Lord, you guys are ridiculous. So he's retiring, and the real story is. Should we just mention, or should we just have more fun with this? Because I was going to have the story that Charles Davis is replacing him.
No, I think that. I think that's good for Tennessee. I'm not sure it's huge. I mean, I think Peyton Manning being a public figure for Tennessee is good for Tennessee. I don't know that it wins them a football game.
Yeah. So I think that it's not. I don't think it's going to help Tennessee at all either. I'm not like one of those people that it's like it's going to help Tennessee, but I do think that it is Charles a nice little.
Charles also doesn't, and it's because he's busy, and I think he lives in L.A. I could be wrong, but it's because he's kind of removed from the program. He doesn't wear his fandom on his sleeve. I think most people watch a game with Charles Davis and they think that was a really well called game. I think most people know that Peyton Manning went to Tennessee, and they're like, "Oh, that's Peyton Manning. He went to Tennessee, right?"
Yeah, no, they do.
Daniel says, "I don't care if he saves a busload of kids. Screw Gary Donaldson."
Okay, who do people hate more, Vern or Gary?
I don't know, but this is what Dylan has to say. Rumor has it Gary and Urban are best friends, and Gary Danielson is sabotaging Georgia for Alabama, giving sports cars to Georgia players. Whoa! Now he's affecting.
I never understood the Gary Danielson hate. I thought he was good, honestly. And I say that as someone who I shouldn't say stiff. That's a weird word. He ghosted me at SEC Media Days a couple of years ago. So I didn't like that, but I thought he did a good. But okay, but it like I feel like that. Can I just say this honestly, David? You tell me if I'm right on this. Do you think Tennessee fans hate the SEC on CBS, Vern Lundquist, Gary Danielson duo a little bit more because that was the decade of dysfunction? So when they were on CBS, they were usually getting the what beat out of them, and that's what they think about is losing so badly.
Listen, here are my thoughts on Gary Danielson. I've had a lot of fun with this, but here are my thoughts on Gary Danielson. I thought he was pretty critical of all teams. I didn't think it was more about Tennessee. I do think your point about Alabama being great and Tennessee being down, that played into the narrative. And I don't want to sound bad. Vern Lundquist probably held on a little bit too long.
Vern did.
thought there were some broadcasts in which maybe he wasn't completely on top of things, and I don't know.
But I think the biggest reason he did was because starting in when the SEC was on that run of national championships, why would you want to leave when you're like calling like the best conference doing that? But also, and you can track this, SEC games got so much more wildly exciting for some reason starting in about 2009. And I mean, why like if you're Vern Lundquist, why would you, and I always bring it up, the Alabama-Auburn game 2013. One of the things Vern Lundquist understood more than I think any broadcaster is you let a moment speak for itself on TV, right? And he knew that, and he did that multiple times.
The best play-by-play guy ever is Pat Summerall with John Madden. And John Madden got all the pub because Pat Summerall knew to step out of the way and say about 1/4 of the words that John Madden did. That's what you should do as a play-by-play guy on television. You got to get the heck out of the way. Dylan says Gary rooted for Germany in the 1940s.
So did Walt Disney.
I don't know if you're a history buff, but everybody's afraid of North Korea. And how about Germany? The first time was pretty close. The second time they had that crazy guy.
Yeah, that megalomaniac.
Yeah.